This is for my political guys. From one of my favorite online newspapers, Asia Times. Coup in Zimbabwe, a win-win for China for now. China has huge investments in Zimbabwe, including tobacco, diamonds, and power generation, and is by far the country's largest benefactor. Did Beijing give the go-ahead to remove Zimbabwe President Robert Mugabe? Nobody is saying. But it is suspicious that Zimbabwe's Army Chief, General Chinwenga, visited China a few days before he moved against Mugabe. Presumably, nobody in Beijing told him no. China has huge investments in Zimbabwe, including tobacco and power generation, and is by far the country's largest benefactor. And Chinese concern, indeed anger, over the last few years over the enforcement of the indigenization. See that? See that? See that? The indigenization law. The nose of the camel. Mugabe's brainchild requiring foreign companies operating in the country to have majority black Zimbabwean ownership. Chinese companies and interests stand to suffer. China can size things up. Even Mugabe isn't going to live forever. And for a successor, it's a choice between his wife, Grace, or recently dismissed Vice President Emerson Mnangagwa. I cannot pronounce these names, whose removal sparked the coup. So it was a choice between the mean, grabby wife and a former Mugabe henchman with the army on his side, and up to his ears in slaughtering 15,000 Matabele people in the 1980s. One of them had guns and the other one didn't. Mnangagwa might also back off the indigenization law, while Grace, a kleptomaniac, was likely to use it to steal even more. And even if the Mugabes wriggle off the hook in a televised address on Sunday, Mugabe declined to say he would step down. Both they and Mnangagwa depend on Beijing's cash and have for years. All in all, it's a win-win for China, anything but an honest leader acting for the country's long-suffering citizens' benefit. Zimbabwe typifies China's approach to Africa. The sheer scale and scope of the Chinese investment in aid, both government and private, is rightly astonishing, and Chinese will go places nobody else will, but it all might lack staying power. That's because it's largely based on throwing money around, and a lot of it. The modus operandi is to buy off literally parts of the local ruling class while building stadiums, government buildings, and the like, in exchange for insinuating Chinese company into a country's natural resources, land, infrastructure, and local industry and business. Not surprisingly, dictators, even if called presidents, and corruptible officials and business people are preferred partners. Beside the Mugabes, the Dos Santos family that runs Angola, and President Jacob Zuma and the Guptas in South Africa, and others have done well with Chinese and vice versa. A decade ago, one East African president reportedly sent a bagman to Europe every month to deposit the Chinese loot. And Chinese infrastructure projects often use imported Chinese labor rather than employing many locals. Not exactly how one makes friends. Such projects are also often plagued by quality control problems, while maintaining them is sometimes an afterthought. Don't maintain them and they'll just fall apart. Africa is littered with such relics from long before the Chinese showed up. Also, China development projects and other deals can come with onerous terms. If a poor country can't repay, China either takes ownership or gets its pound of flesh elsewhere. Indeed, China and Africa sometimes make Cecil Rhodes look like a philanthropist. Although Beijing is on a roll of sorts, its Africa play is going to be hard to pull off over the long run. Cash only buys friendship for so long, and relatively few locals benefit, leading to popular resentment. Before long, expect to see the People's Liberation Army showing up to protect Chinese investments, especially natural resources extraction projects in Africa. And Chinese expeditionary forces based in Djibouti for now will likely intervene to protect Chinese communities when local resentment at corruption and Beijing's economic rapaciousness boils over. Perhaps to have most impact, Beijing should figure out a way to hand off U.S. green cards in large quantities. Oh, man. Touche. Recycled cash. Despite China's preference for dictators and corruptibles, the West shouldn't chuckle. Although long in advice, the West has done little to promote honest government in Africa. What the continent really needs in the years before or since the Chinese became major players. One principal African jurist recently described Western aid to Africa as recycled money. His point, money stolen by corrupt elites is moved to Europe or America, where local banks are glad to have it. Western governments then send along foreign aid with anti-corruption lectures. The money is once again stolen, sent back to Europe, and the process starts over. That Mugabe has lasted 37 years says plenty. Despite horrific human rights record, snuffing out democracy and looting the country, the West did little to call him to account. Indeed, it even played a major role in installing him in power. Nobody cares to think about that these days. Nor is Asia much better. The welcome mat has been out for Mugabe in Tokyo several times, to include a state visit and meeting with the emperor in 2016. And the Mugabes are frequent visitors to Hong Kong, Malaysia, and Singapore. Mugabe regularly goes to Singapore for medical treatment. Of course, when he took over Zimbabwe in 1980, he only had to drive a couple of miles from his mansion to Harare to find a world-class hospital. But back to China and Africa, Beijing will someday learn, probably the hard way, that even with Chinese characteristics, colonialism is still just colonialism. And Africans who aren't on the take don't appreciate it much. And that is from Asia Times, written by, who was it written by? By Grant Newsham. Never heard of him before, but I will keep an eye on him. Oh, the tangled web we weave. Chinese are very pragmatic. They come in and do business. The only difference between, well, I would say the biggest difference between the Chinese and the Americans is that the Chinese do pay more. They pay more, and at least they do build things. America never really built a whole lot. At least they will give the Africans a better deal. But like the article says, colonialism is colonialism. It is what it is. When in hell, you must do bargains with devils. And a devil's bargain in hell is better than no bargain. And there was something, I think I said it a while back. It must have been on a hangout about the Chinese doing, like I said, the pimp announcing the game. And the Chinese People's Liberation Army actually setting up in Djibouti to protect their assets. It is what it is. The only question is China a better pimp than America and Europe was? And can Africa actually make a better bargain while they still can? Europe and America still have power. And while they still have power before they decline, it is best for the African nations to start making their deals for the future, getting what they can out and not trying to scarf up as much money as you can, because that money that the African leaders take or transfer away can always be taken back. Look at Gaddafi had billions and billions of dollars. Mubarak in Egypt had $70 billion. How much did those $70 billion do good did that do him when he's in an Egyptian prison after the Arab uprising, Arab Spring? None. Invest in your people rather than in your pockets. That's what I would say. because it's not about you. It's about your children, and it's about your grandchildren and the legacy that you leave them. Because doing the devil's bargain, the devil always wins in the end. The Chinese do business. They do business. You are not civilized to them. They do business. You have to do business with the Chinese. They are not your rescuers. They are not your saviors. They're doing business, and the only thing I like about the Chinese, they do better business than Europe. Europe and America were thieves. Chinese are businessmen. But in the end, whether it's a thief or a businessman, they don't have your best interests in mind. And now that China is expanding out to the whole world, and they don't necessarily need you as a vital piece anymore. It's still a vital piece, but I'm saying is as far as that linchpin to actually take over the planet, they don't need that anymore. You have to really buckle down and do business. Stop being naive. That's what I would say to my African brothers. And Cerulean, I told you. I was just telling you that. Everything doesn't have the hairy white hand of the white man on it. Still, there's not enough breadcrumbs to actually suss out the situation and who did what. But that will be evident very soon. But with that, I'm going to close this one out. This is for my conspiracy and geopolitical brothers. I'm sure my Pan-African brothers will chime in underneath. But I'm going to jump off of here, and this is BGS out.